that's for another day. But I want to talk more pragmatically about this idea of teaching aesthetics, which is actually a very strictly pragmatic problem from where I sit, since I'm still teaching. And if I were to offer a course in aesthetics at Villanova University, it would promptly be canceled for a lack of enrollment. Students would not take it. Students don't take courses, in my experience these days, where they cannot reasonably expect to get either an A minus or better. B plus is the minimal grade they'll accept. And if they can't expect to get a B plus in the course, they're just not going to take it. And we have stopped offering epistemology in our philosophy department at Villanova because students didn't take it because they didn't understand what it meant. We once offered courses in hermeneutics. Students no longer took it, and so we had to cancel them. Phenomenology, again, they don't understand what it is, and so they just don't take the courses. And if the courses don't run, then we can't teach them, and that's the end of the day. So it's a new world order out there. Students are, it reminds me very much of a novella by Marguerite Duras, where the main character, Ernesto, refuses to go to school because at school they teach him things he doesn't already know. I think our students, my students anyway, are a lot like that. Now, at Villanova, we take about 1,700 students a year. 100 of those go to the nursing college, 250 go to the business school, 150 go to engineering, another 200 go to biology and chemistry to feed the pharmaceutical industry in my part of the world. That leaves about 1,000 students who do not come in with a 4-year commitment to a major. Of those 1,000 students, 15 will turn out to be philosophy majors, and about half of those are double majors. We have lots of philosophy minors, but philosophy minors are not going to take epistemology, metaphysics, or aesthetics, but they will take courses that teach them things they already know. They'll take philosophy and literature, for example, because they all took English classes in high school. They'll take philosophy in film because they grew up watching movies again and again and again, Polka, The Little Mermaid. I was taught philosophy in film, and one summer when I was teaching a course, I had one of my students talk about Disney classics, and I had no idea what she was talking about. And this was The Lion King, Polka, The Little Mermaid, which she had seen dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And they have a facility for looking at films that I do not, because I don't tend to watch the kinds of movies that are as formulaic as the ones they view. The other course they will take is philosophy and music, because they think they know a lot about music. And back in 1989, I created a course called The Philosophy of Contemporary Music, where I was attempting to talk about the difference between music and noise. And because I was very interested in noise bands, and students at that time were listening to a lot of Gothic rock kinds of things. And so I traded on that, and I have for the last 30 some years, longer now, taught this course every year and tried to keep up with what is popular among students. What are they listening to? And trying to then trade on what they think they already know to teach them something that they don't already know. So I teach a course which focuses on pop, rock, rap, hip hop, punk, jazz now, which I could have been able to insert, live mixed DJ music, and then drumming. But it really is a disguised way for me to teach Nietzsche on Dionysian impulse, the culture industry a la Adorno and Horkheimer, psychoanalysis through Joan Rivera and Judith Butler, Adorno on jazz, Deleuze on rhizomatic live DJ music, and then Merleau-Ponty on the body as a site of intelligibility. Drumming, it turns out, is a site of groove in music. And a young colleague of ours, Tiger Roholt, has written a book. We actually published his dissertation he wrote with Lydia Gurr at Columbia. And that book is called Groove. And it talks about motoricity and draws from Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology of perception to talk about the body as a site of intelligibility. But I can't start there. I have to start with a sense of why it is that young people continue to make music, which is something that still fascinates me. Why do young people continue to think that they can do something new with music? And they think they can. They try all these new innovations. So what's the ritual that gets them going on music? And I've started with this book, this guy, Jacques Attali. He's not a philosopher. He's an economist, French economist. It's called Noise, a Political Economy of Music. And it traces the way that music begins as a ritual function that gets formed over the course of its history into a representational model that can then be performed in larger groups and for larger sensibilities until it becomes formed as repetition in records and then tapes and then CDs and now streaming, where the ritual element has bled out, where the idea of going to the symphony, dressing for the symphony, going to dinner before the symphony, to go to hear music, or even to a concert, a rock concert, the ritual involved in that of getting together with your friends and driving there and getting loaded in the car before you go to the show and all that business is bled out when you can just click a button, click a link, and now you hear anything you want. When I first started teaching this course in '89, students were still in that mode where they were waiting for the next recording by their favorite band. Now they listen to everything. One day in class, I played Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra doing a duet, and they were blown away, and they wanted to hear more of it. Music for them has become decontextualized, it's become de-ritualized, but because I can get their interest, I can then try to show for them that the impulse for this music comes from this fundamental Dionysian thing that Nietzsche gave us in The Birth of Tragedy. And now I can begin to treat a kind of aesthetics. I can try to get them to be sensitive to a different kind of sensibility that they wouldn't be attentive to otherwise. But then I can show them how that sensitivity gets meted down, gets blunted by the representational scheme that gives us even temperament, that gives us musical scores, that gives us music lessons and music schools, and gives us a form of representing music as just what the culture wants, just what will feed a democratic impulse, so that the aesthetic is not just what I'm listening to in terms of the sounds the music is making, but in terms of the culture that are being supported by that music. And so now I've got them thinking of aesthetic sensibilities, although I never use that word. I always talk about the experiences that they're having, but without ever using the word aesthetics, because that will frighten them, frankly. So now I've got a representational scheme that is giving them a musical experience. And now that they've got a sense of the repetition factor, the fact that I no longer have to go to the symphony to hear Beethoven. I can put it on my record player. I no longer have to go to the concert to hear AC/DC or Motley Crue. I can just put it in my CD. I can stream all this music. My students have separate standing terabyte level hard drives just to store their music. And Attali's point is they've got all this music. How much do they listen to? They listen to maybe 10 tracks at a time. And the rest of it is obsolete. It's no longer popular, but they listen to it anyway. So what's the nature of their aesthetics experience here? It's pretty much been formed by the culture industry. What they want to listen to, they don't even know what they want to listen to. None of us know what we want to listen to, because what we can hear is what's made available to us by the culture industry. And so that's all that we will get. But is there a possibility for something more? And that's the tease I use to get them to think about other forms of music. So now, this spring, when I teach the course, I'm going to have to, because this is what's going on, we're going to have to talk about Taylor, we're going to have to talk about Beyonce, and we're going to have to talk about Billie Eilish, because these women have ruled the summer. These women have ruled pop music, even if they get very little airplay. You turn over a rock everywhere. There's Taylor Swift. You can't avoid her. And yet she doesn't get the airplay that the men do. So why is it that women in music are driving the industry but getting so little respect for it? And how is that shaping the aesthetic experience of listening to music for a lot of my young students who were actually very savvy about this stuff? Olivia Rodrigo is another one we're going to have to talk about again this spring, because she's got a new CD and she has a new sound, and the young people seem to think she's doing something special. So where are the dudes? I mean, where are they? What are they doing? And what kind of music are they making? And the men in my class will tell me, and they'll send me. I asked them. I set up a what is it called, Spotify collaborative playlist. I used to have students make me mixtapes, so I knew what they were listening to. Now they do a Spotify collaborative playlist, and they put music up, and I then learn what they're listening to, and I try to make sense of it for them in philosophical terms. So with Attali, I can draw from Nietzsche, I can draw from Adorno and Horkheimer, I can draw from Marx himself, and then to get to a place where what Attali calls composition, which is music that is made for the sheer pleasure of making music rather than to make money. And so I listen to SoundCloud, and I listen to Bandcamp, and I listen to things that are put up there by young people who just have a machine or two or three and are able to make music on their own. So from my side, the aesthetics is from the point of view of the artists, those who are making the music, and the listeners. I'm less interested in the product than in the process that goes into making that product and into the forming of the listening habits of my students and the way that those are formed. And so now I can look at, for example, I was just saying the way women fit into this. Do women artists fit into contemporary music as one of the boys? Say Gwen Stefani or Joan Jett. I think Beyonce maybe fits in that. Do they fit in as the girly girl alternative to the wannabe man, like Tori Amos? Or in some sense, a lot of Taylor Swift is like that. Are they masquerading femininity the way Madonna and Grace Jones and Annie Lennox do? Or are they trying to mix up these gender types and using music to do that, using what we would call aesthetic experience of making and listening to music to form different gender identities for themselves? There's a book out there called Glitter Up the Dark by a trans person who writes for Pitchfork, who has a whole book about the way that gender bending is a part of music. It has been forever, in fact, he would claim. And so now I can move on to jazz as another attempt to break out of the aesthetic straitjacket of the culture industry, because jazz has and hasn't fit into it, right? We've got our Joshua Redmonds, and we've got our Kenny G's playing smooth jazz and all that stuff. But we've for a long time had a jazz tradition where Black people especially have attempted to chafe at, let's call it, the culture industry of making music. And there's a great book by this woman, Fumio Kiji, called Jazz as Critique, where she takes on Adorno's idea of structural listening and his refusal to hear Black music, in fact, and shows how his obsession with bourgeois individualism, again, is a part of the general social aesthetic that we're working with or living in, how his obsession with bourgeois individualism makes him deaf to what's going on in Black music, which is a collective storytelling, a sharing of Black people with the culture that they're a part of. And so I can now introduce a whole idea of a Black culture, which is running simultaneously with white culture. And I'll get to this when I talk about grad teaching in a little bit, because now I can start talking about traditional embodiment, which is white masculine embodiment, the kind of stuff we find in rock and pop, female embodiment, which is another way of tracking music and having aesthetic experiences, and now Black embodiment, which is another way of having an aesthetic experience from the point of view of a perception that is embodied within Black culture. So now I'm on to, so I get through jazz, which is interesting. I've been able to get students actually to write about it. And most of my students at Villanova are white. It's, they used to call it Villanova. It's not quite so bad as that anymore, but it's still pretty pasty, my Black friends would say. And to get my white students mostly to appreciate what's going on in jazz and to hear that music, which they can only hear if they give up their white supremacist embodiment to a certain extent. And so now I move on to what I call live mixed DJ music, a book by a young guy, DJ Spooky, he goes by, as a philosophy BA from Bowdoin. And he's written a book, Rhythm Science. He also is a DJ. And he uses the theories of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari from Mille Plateaux, 1,000 Plateaus, and the idea of rhizome. And so live mixed DJ music and rhizomatics fit really well together, in fact. And I can use Spooky to teach Deleuze, and I can use Spooky to describe popular music as emerging as an abstract machine from a plane of immanence to becoming concrete machines, which then break down and devolve back into a plane of immanence, which forms the basis for more abstract machines, more compositions within popular and DJ music. And so I can do a kind of Deleuzian aesthetics without actually getting too deeply into that, playing on the surface, because I'm working with students who come to my class because they like music. We have maybe 5 classes at Villanova that treat music at all. Okay, we don't have a music school. When I first went to Villanova back in '86, I thought I'd bring my tenor saxophone to my office and park it there, and in my spare time go to a music studio and play. And there were no music studios. There were no music classes. There were no performance classes, 0. And so my students come to my class because they can come to my class and I play music in class. They can get fine arts credit for my class because I do play music, and we do talk about music theory. We do talk about music performance. And so I've got to keep them engaged because they're not philosophy majors. A lot of them are engineers who are finally taking a philosophy class in their senior year because they've got a free slot to fill in, or they're business students, or they're scientists. Very few philosophy majors end up in my philosophy of contemporary music class. They think it's not serious enough. So now I've gotten down to, I've worked them through this stuff, and they've got to enough theory that I can now get to this book Groove, where I can start to talk about my sense of aesthetics, which is comparable to Arnold's, I think, but also, as I was saying before, more focused on the phenomenology of perception in Merleau-Ponty, and more focused on the way that perception is embodied, and that embodiment is an embodiment in an environment which is the environment it is because of the embodiments that populate it. But I can do this now with the example of drumming. And so what Roholt does very cleverly he, and I think astutely, he points out how great a drummer Ringo was. Okay, so think about that. I mean, I grew up with Ringo, and Ringo was always a joke. It was Paul and John; they were the the cool leaders. There was George, who was kind of weird, but it turns out that George and Ringo were the musicians. John and Paul were just the front guys. But Ringo was a badass drummer, and and there are plenty of YouTube videos that show just how good Ringo was with that simple trap set he had: a snare, a tom, a kick drum, a hi-hat, and I think he had two cymbals. And so you got David Grohl up there saying, Ringo was the thing. I forget. I'm forgetting his name, but a black drummer said, I grew up wanting to be Ringo. And what did Ringo have? Ringo had groove. Ringo had a way of sitting in the rhythm and holding it down and moving it forward at the same time. And that is a form of embodied cognition. And so I can teach them embodied cognition, not abstractly in trying to talk about Merleau-Ponty for much, although I bring it in, but I use the example of drumming to actually teach them what I mean by embodied cognition. And they get it. And for them, groove is the thing that the course is headed towards, and it's what hooks them. And I've had a lot of success with this, and it's been fun, actually. So I get pretty good papers from them that discuss. So sometimes some of them will write on jazz and actually write pretty well. Sometimes I get musicians in the class, and that's always a great thing. I had a drummer last semester, and it was wonderful to have point to him and say, tell us more about what's going on here. I'm always playing music for my students that they've never heard, even though they've heard a gabillion bits of it. But they are, I bring them along. And again, it's a course that I've been teaching for over 30 years. Now, so there are my undergraduates. My undergraduates are not philosophy majors for the most part. They are just there for the ride. They're there for the music. They're there to get 3 credits. Maybe they're getting a fine art credit, which they're required to do out of their way. Maybe they're just, I usually teach it late in the afternoon, and they're the students who don't get out of bed early. So that's one thing. I've been able to hold that down, and I think I can continue teaching that class for as long as I like. My graduate students are a different story. So at Villanova, it's like 2 worlds. My undergraduate population is mostly, if I had to give a term to it, it's mostly analytic, philosophically directed. They're more interested in problems, and they take tons and tons of ethics courses. If you were to look at our curriculum, and you'd think that we taught nothing but ethics, and in part that's because it's a Catholic school, and that's part what they want us to do. And my students are, they're Catholic. They think, most of them anyway, and so they think they're ethical to begin with. So again, they think they know what ethics is about. There's environmental ethics, engineering ethics, computer ethics, biomedical ethics. They think they understand what's going on. We're now my faculty wants us to hire in ethics of AI. I don't think AI has ethics, but all right, whatever. But my graduate students are distinctly continental. Villanova is one of 12 continental philosophy programs in the US out of the hundreds that there are. And so we get a very distinctive student body, and they come with a certain set of expectations. Mostly those expectations are hermeneutic. They come to Villanova and they are willing to take history of philosophy classes because history of philosophy classes are basically an extension of the hermeneutics that they're thinking they're going to do. So they'll take courses in Aristotle and Plato and Kant and Hegel and whatnot. But because they're also looking for courses on Derrida and Foucault and Deleuze and Nietzsche and, the Rancière we teach now. And there's this idea that there are these great people whose difficult and great words we have to understand. And that's the way I was trained. I was trained in the traditional continental program, and we just said back to our professors what the great men mostly had to say. And it's not a bad way to go about doing things, but it's certainly not the only way. And it's not one that gets you very far into aesthetics. And why? Why? Because Heidegger, one of the great gods of continental philosophy, Heidegger taught us that aesthetics were bad. Why were aesthetics bad? Because he took it from Kant that aesthetics was a subjective feeling of pleasure that we got from the play of the cognitive faculties. And it was precisely the psychologism that phenomenology set out to undermine. It was a subjective feeling. And so there were never any courses in aesthetics in my training in philosophy back in the 70s and 80s. And it's very difficult to get my students at Villanova to take aesthetics seriously. For years, my rotation at Villanova was Nietzsche, Foucault, and Deleuze. Every 3 years, just kept cycling, because that's what students wanted. That's what will get my classes to carry. And I wanted my classes to carry. And so that's what I taught. And we would, of course, be hard to talk about Nietzsche without talking about art and artists. You could certainly talk about Foucault without that. You could certainly talk about Deleuze without that. But my entry into Deleuze, really my own interest, was the cinema volumes. And so I started teaching more of Deleuze on cinema. And but when I would try to teach Nietzsche on music, nobody would show up. They wanted Will to Power, Eternal Return, Superman, and that was about all they cared about. So, how am I going to teach aesthetics in this framework? Well, I started, as I said, with teaching Deleuze on the cinema volumes, and then I started expanding that more to making it cinema, and to saying I would do some Deleuze. But then I started bringing in Stanley Cavell and Noel Carroll and Tom Wartenberg and Cynthia Freeland and Linda Williams. And I was able now to get my students to think about cinema from the point of view of aesthetics. And for me, then, what I was bringing in, without telling them, because if I told them this, they would run from the class like a plague. But Alvin Noe's Varieties of Presence, which gives an account of enactivism in terms of skills and skill sets. And I started describing cinematic genre as the coincidence of a certain skill set that were skills that were acquired and refined by filmmakers and skills that were acquired and refined by film viewers. So I use the example of horror films, which is my own shortcoming, and also because Noel Carroll likes to always want to show how superior he is to me, and so he will hold horror films against me. That's something I understand very little of, but my students love horror movies. They understand the topology of horror movies without thinking twice. But I don't get them because I don't have the skill sets. I've not acquired the skills or refined them for understanding horror movies. I'm much better at auteur films. I'm much better, say, at melodramas. So, but I can use this idea of film genre to talk about enactivism in aesthetics, because now I can talk about film genre as something that's not just given but achieved, and something that's achieved at a cost. That to hold together a horror film, or to hold together a melodrama, or to hold together a courtroom drama, I've got to, at every moment, achieve that genre in the course of making that film. I've got to have the right people on screen. I've got to use the right palette. I've got to have the right pacing. I've got to have the right camera angles to achieve that genre effect. And those genre are affordances, as Arnold's talking about from J.J. Gibson, those skills that filmmakers have leave affordances on the screen for film viewers to pick up and to enact as the genre of the film that they're viewing. So cinema becomes this way of a meeting of skills on the side of the filmmaker and skills on the side of the film viewer, which must come together to make a successful film within a specific genre. And not all films are genre films, but many, many, many are. The Marvel comic universe, or I think I'll call it the Marvel cinematic universe, is one example of this. But think of all of Hitchcock's films. Think of Claude Chabrol, another great filmmaker, not to mention Godard and Jane Campion and this is one of these things I'm phasing on this Bigelow, who made 0 Dark 30, and also Point Break, a wonderful, a great film. Is Point Break a surfer film, or is it a cop and robber film? It's hard to know. But so I can do that with the cinema, and it's so I'm teaching them enactivist aesthetics, what I call enactivist aesthetics. But I can't, again, if I call the course enactivist aesthetics, I don't get, it doesn't fill, and they don't come. But if I think they're getting a course about cinema, and then I'm going to talk about Deleuze, and I do talk about Deleuze. I talk about Deleuze in terms of the time image and the movement image. I talk about, I'm especially attracted to the time image. I think basically the cinema 1 is Hitchcock, cinema 2 is Godard, and I'm a big fan of Godard. And so I can work in that. I use auteur theory as a kind of genre, kind of film genre. I borrow that from Bordwell. But then lately, I'm in my second iteration of this. And again, the first time I got a crowd, and this time I did not. And I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe people didn't like what I did the first time. But I've been teaching this course that I call Black Aesthetics. And what I mean by Black Aesthetics is a sense of embodied perception that it gives an insight into Black life, and that realizes Black life in a variety of artistic endeavors. So I start with Paul Taylor's book, Black is Beautiful, which is a good entry into this. I think for Taylor, the aesthetic is the look and feel of the thing. He's around here. He's not on this call yet. The look and feel of the thing. How does a certain movie or a certain novel or a certain advertisement capture a Black aesthetic? And I think he's taking the Black aesthetic mostly from the aesthetic of the Black arts movement, and which is a great example. And I think I love all that stuff. But what I'm interested in as an enactivist, if I can call myself that, if that makes any sense, people have questioned whether I have any right to do that, since I don't do enough straightforward philosophy of mind. But all right, I'll take that challenge. But from my perspective, I'm interested in the skills that the artist deploys to make what we would call identifiably Black art, and the skills that audiences have for realizing or achieving that Black art when it is presented to them. So I start with Taylor's Black is Beautiful, but then I go on to Fred Moten in The Break, and especially Moten's take on Amiri Baraka's take on the Burton Green project. So you've got Amiri Baraka, who's a Black man, who has changed his name from Leroy Jones to Amiri Baraka to embrace some of that Blackness. He's the embodiment of Blackness. He's in Newark, not even in New York, and he's seeing this music and he's writing about it. And then you've got Fred Moten, who is a Black literary critic, basically, literary theorist, I'm sorry, who is commenting on Amiri Baraka. So I've got a form of Black embodiment, commenting on a form of Black embodiment, commenting on a form of Black embodiment in jazz music. And in terms of the Burton Green project, embodiment by a white man with two Black men also in the bandstand, Pharoah Sanders and Marion Brown. And Green is the piano player. And so I'm trying to find ways of multiplying the senses of embodiment and trying to find a place where we don't have a white and black world, white or black world, I'm sorry, but we have a white, black and white, where as a white person, I can find a way into the kinds of embodiment that are having access to something in this artworks that I wouldn't have otherwise. And so I'm using Black authors to do that. And then I move on to Fumio Kiji again, because I like her stuff a lot, and because she gives, now with my graduate students, I actually teach them Adorno, and actually teach them what it is that Adorno says and why it's wrong. And they will, because they are also interested in Frankfurt School, and so they will, they're able to appreciate that. So we can talk about jazz, and here the embodiment is in terms of the stories that are told by Black artists to Black audiences and to other Black artists. So she talks about being on a bandstand with the playing jazz standards. So a standard version of All Blues by Miles Davis, for example, is the same chart every time everybody plays that tune. They're playing from the same chart, and yet they're adding something of themselves to that. And in doing that, they're having a conversation with all the other people who've ever played this tune. And now they are also having a conversation with all the other people in the bandstand and with all the people in the audience for this music. And there's a shared storytelling that's going on. And this is also part of this Black experience. It's also part of this embodied Black experience. And we're working on, this is in this version of this course, a woman named Tina Campt, C-A-M-P-T. She's from Johannesburg, Black woman, and she's talking about Black experiences that emerge from what she calls a Black gaze. So again, going back to what Arnold was saying about perception and aesthetic experience. So how is a Black gaze different from the white gaze? The white gaze would be the dominant view, would be the white supremacist view, would be the way the world looks officially to everyone else. And how is it different from the point of view of a Black gaze? And she talks about this. It's the last thing to say, so I'm getting to end of my time here. She talks about this filmmaker, Arthur Jaffa, J-A-F-A. And he was the cinematographer on Daughters of the Dust by Julie Dash, and also the cinematographer on Crooklyn by Spike Lee, both in the 90s. But he's most well known for recently, 2017, he made the 7-minute film called Love is the Message is Death. And it's this collage of images and drawing from the rhythms of Black music. So the pace of the images, the amount of time these moving images stay on screen, the way they're put together, stitched together, the way they form a whole is through the rhythm of Black music, through what he says is endemic somehow to Black music, where he takes music to be something that Black people have contributed to American culture that surpasses anything that white people have done. And so he gives us a collage of images with a musical background that really challenges the white gaze. I've seen it dozens of times. This work exists in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, also in several museums in Europe, and San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And it's something that I think I probably need to stop and watch every single fragment and then watch them all again, because the images that go by are not just visual signs, but they're visual signs that are informed by a verbal text, which is the verbal text of Black culture, which is not necessarily known to me. And so there are plenty of these images that go by, which are important to Black culture, that show up for a Black gaze, but don't show up for my white gaze. And I think it's incumbent upon me to expand my sense of an aesthetic experience by expanding outside of the parameters of whiteness that perforce, and it's not just, it's not my fault necessarily, pervade the way I see the world. So I think that's about the time I have. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much, John. It's a real pleasure to finally meet you. Really lovely. I really appreciate the wit, which was pervasive. I wanted to say two things. First one is a little joke about Ringo Starr. About 15 years ago or so, I found myself in a seedy hotel in Western Australia. And a musician out there at the bar told me this story. Someone asked John Lennon if Ringo Starr is the best drummer in the world. And his response was, Ringo Starr is not even the best drummer in the Beatles.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one.
If you listen, yeah, go ahead.
But on a more serious note, I wanted to ask you about something more personal. Can you share with us, if something comes to your mind immediately, in terms of teaching aesthetics as an activist experience? Because you've shared with us that you've been, challenging and expanding yourself through teaching Blackness and things like that, and through teaching aesthetics to your students, postgraduate, undergraduate students. Have you, can you recall something that really blew you away?
I'm always blown away by my undergraduates, because they're listening to music that I don't necessarily listen to, and they're always challenging me to hear something different. So that's always good. But my graduate students have gone on and done some really great work, actually, dissertations and whatnot, that has shown me that they're still worthwhile what we're doing. That so, but the blown away business. I have students who actually are musicians, and who have invited me to sit in and listen to them, and I've been like, wow, you should have said more in class. You should have done more with that. You should have made more examples. But the Black aesthetics class is one where I have been humbled by the occasional non-white student that I have in there, who will say something that in a way that I didn't anticipate. And that, as you say, it's humbling. And I try to keep that sense of humility all the time when I'm teaching. That I'm not the expert, I'm not the star. I'm just there. I'm feeding off of what they're doing, as I'm feeding off of what's going on here. And it makes you better, because you expand your skill set, and you refine that skill set, and you find a way to impart a rhythm to the way in which you present things, which is key to making it intelligible and also key to sharing and just generally. And that's the thing I try to do.
Thank you so much. We have a few more minutes, guys, for questions. Please feel free to engage with John. It's a one-off opportunity, really.
Hi, John.
Hi,
Pleasure to
Joshua.
meet you. Yeah. This is Joshua. Yeah, thank you for your talk. So much to think about, processing a whole lot. Already got some more books added to my queue to be reading soon, thanks to you. The Comte book and the Jazzist critique sounds really really interesting and important. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to digging into those soon. So I'm wondering what you think, because I feel like you're kind of in this orbit. You're saying things that seem to me really close to this. You're talking about music, and you're talking about embodiment and performance, and Africana and Black traditions. And I'm wondering what you think about the relationship between music and dance when you're teaching music and teaching aesthetics, and maybe especially when you're teaching like Africana and Black aesthetics. Do you have any thoughts about?
Because of course, I mean, so we do at one time in the music class. So it changes all the time. 25 years ago, students couldn't stop talking about Britney Spears. Then the next year it was Kanye. And for a while we did disco. I did a whole section on disco and dance music, and the way that dance music is denigrated in pop music tradition. If it's something you can dance to, it's not serious, and so it's not really music. And I used to push back hard against that. Now my dancing is pathetic. Like when nobody's home, and I'll dance to myself, but I don't want to take it out in the streets or anywhere. But I think it's very key. And I think as a form of another form of embodied cognition. What is dancing? Dancing is a way of showing what you know about what you're listening to. And if your body can respond and stay on beat, and if it can be expressive and in a way that can be shared with other people, then I think that it's a really special thing. And it's it's a place that I would love to go back to. But my students, especially after COVID, they stopped going out to clubs, and they go to concerts. And I stopped going to concerts decades ago when they wouldn't let us stand up in our seats because we were blocking the view of someone behind me. And my view is, I'm not here to sit and watch somebody. I'm here to enjoy the music, and how I enjoy the music is by getting off my ass and shaking it a little bit. But a great question, and thanks very much. I have to go back and do more with that, because I think it's without. I mean, I suppose we would dance if there were no music, but for the most part, I think we dance because we're responding to the rhythm of either life or of the band or whatever. And to make music that you can dance to. And that's what David Grohl said about Ringo, back to Valerie's question, that he said he just was playing this beat, boom, boom. And he said, if you can just do this and get people on the dance floor, you're amazing. And Ringo was able to do that. And getting back to Valerie's joke about Ringo, the song Birthday by the Beatles, that's not Ringo drumming on that tune. It's Ringo was in a stint, he left the studio, and McCartney plays the drums on that. And you can tell because it just is so stiff. I mean, it's a funky beat, that song. I forget what it is. Is it 5/4 or whatever? But it doesn't have the drive that Ringo gives it. It's just chunka, 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 chunka. Great question. Thanks so much, Joshua.